FBC Edge students, what's up? Parents, those of you who are just happen to catch this. This is Michael at First Baptist Church in Chickamauga, who just each week trying to post a video to continue our teaching during this time when we're not meeting, and also just to be able to encourage you and to challenge you in different ways. I hope that this is a time that is encouraging to you. And just to be honest with you, just to kind of get into this kind of right off the bat, this is a little bit heavy today. We've been working our way through the book of Job just by God's providence. We actually started this a couple of weeks before this whole mess with the virus got rolling, and so we have been working our way through this, and I feel like as we hit Job chapter 3 that it's going to be something that is incredibly timely for you. But again, it's pretty shocking what we read tonight, and in it we find in the midst of some really difficult words from Job, we find some comfort and some hope. And so that's what we want to leave you with. But just know that we've kind of made, in a lot of ways, Christianity very neat and very clean and very tidy. And the reality of it is life can be really, really messy. And when we try to clean it up, I think that we miss some of the really hard moments and some of the things that God teaches us in those hard moments. And so we're going to learn a little bit about that in the book of Job in chapter 3 as we continue our study. One of the things that we don't talk a lot about, we don't hear a lot about this in our teaching, and we read about it quite a bit, this idea of lament. We see Psalms of lament. We see David asking how long his enemies will prosper over him and be victorious over him. We know Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, who wrote an entire book of laments called Lamentations. And here we see Job lament. And I think what we're going to find here is that lamenting is not something that we should shy away from. This idea of grieving and mourning and even questioning a little bit as to what is happening and what God is doing. That doesn't mean that God owes us a response. It doesn't mean that He owes us an explanation. I heard someone say earlier this week that the fact that we question these things, that we have to wrestle with these things, is just a reminder that we're not God. And I think that is a healthy thing, to know that God in His sovereignty and His providence is working and moving in ways that we don't see and don't understand. Even in the midst of this situation that we find ourselves in right now, God is at work, and He's going to bring good from this, even in the midst of great heartbreak and heartache for many, many people. We know that God ultimately will be glorified. And it's a great mystery to us, how He works all things for the good of those who love Him, who are called according to His purpose. But our hope rests there. One of my favorite authors is a Puritan, or not, around the time, a little bit later than the Puritans, but Jonathan Edwards is a guy who his writing is so profound, and I really enjoy reading him and the stuff that he wrote. And he wrote these 70 resolutions that he strove to live by, and he finished the 70th one by the time that he turned 19. And these are things that he resolved to live by. And what we find with Jonathan Edwards, what we find with guys like Martin Luther, even Charles Spurgeon, is that these are guys who, though they're some of our quote-unquote heroes, is those are guys who struggled greatly with things like depression and despair, like we saw Job wrestling with here. But I want to read to you, this is going to take just a few minutes, but I want to read to you a little bit about what Jonathan Edwards wrote in his diary. So his 45th resolution says, "Resolve never to allow any pleasure or grief, joy or sorrow, nor any affection at all, nor any degree of affection, nor any circumstance relating to it, but what helps religion." And so basically this is a resolution to not give in to things like despair. But I want to read to you this journal entry. It says, January 15th, Tuesday about 2 or 3 o'clock, "I've been all this day decaying. It seemed yesterday, the day before, and Saturday that I should always retain the same resolution to the same height. But alas, how soon do I decay? Oh, how weak, how infirm, how unable to do anything of myself. What a poor, inconsistent being, what a miserable wretch without the assistance of God's Spirit. While I stand, I'm ready to think. I stand by my own strength and upon my own legs, and I'm ready to triumph over my spiritual enemies as if it were I myself that caused them to flee. When alas, I am but a poor infant upheld by Jesus Christ, who holds me up and gives me liberty to smile, to see my enemies flee when he drives them before me. And so I laugh as if I myself did it, when it is only Jesus Christ leads me along and fights himself against my enemies. And now the Lord has a little left me. How weak do I find myself? Oh, let it teach me to depend less on myself, to be more humble, and to give more of the praise of my ability to Jesus Christ." And he goes on, it says, "The occasion of my decaying is a little melancholy. My spirits are down, and I am concerned because I fear I lost some friendship last night. And my spirits being low, my resolutions have lost their strength. I differ today from yesterday in these things. I do not resolve anything today half so strongly. I am not so perpetually thinking on and renewing my resolutions as I was then. I am not half so vigorous as I was then, nor am I half so careful to do everything with vigor. Then I kept continually acting, but now I do things slowly and satisfy myself by thinking of religion in the meantime. I am not so careful to go quick from one business to another. I felt humiliation about sunset. What shall I do frequently with a good grace to fall into Christian discourse and conference?" And then he goes on, January 17th, about 3 o'clock, "Overwhelmed with melancholy. Friday at night, beginning to endeavor to recover out of the death that I have been in these several days." And then January the 20th, at night, "The last week I sunk so low that I fear it will be a long time ere I shall be recovered. I fell exceedingly low in the weekly account. I find my heart so deceitful that I am almost discouraged from making any more resolutions. Wherein I have been negligent in the past week, how could I have done better to help the dreadful low estate in which I am sunk?" So Jonathan Edwards in his diary is talking about this despair, this melancholy that he experienced. And we know that he was one of the leading pastors of his time, though he dealt with quite a bit of a mess in his time pastoring. But he himself dealt with this despair, and I think that we can relate to that. We understand that. Job is going to lament. He is going to despair. Of course, we know that he has lost everything at this point. His means to which he had a livelihood is gone. His family is gone. His health has deteriorated to the point that he has been using broken pottery to scratch the sores off of his skin, off of his flesh. His wife has even told him just to curse God and to die. And so he is at a place of great trouble. He has some friends who have shown up to hopefully comfort him. We know that that's not going to go well. But they are sitting in silence for 7 days. And after 7 days, Job speaks. Now, this is only the third time that we've heard Job speak at this point. At one point, he is talking about how the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And then he goes on in verse 10. He says, "Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" And so far what Job has said have been things that we hold to, we cling to. But now as he opens his mouth in chapter 3, we find that he is going to lament. He will not curse God, but he is going to say some things that we find very, very heavy, that I think we all at some point in our lives can relate to. So the first thing I want you to see is that he wishes, or he says that he wished that he had never been born. This is verses 1 through 10. He says, "After this day, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job said, 'Let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said, a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. That night let darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the numbers of the months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful cry enter it. Let those who curse it, who curse the day, let those curse it who curse the day, who are ready to rouse up Leviathan. Let the stars of its dawn be dark. Let it hope for light, but have none, nor see the eyelids of the morning, because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb, nor hide trouble from my eyes.'" So Job, he does not curse God, but he curses the day of his birth. And this idea of cursing is the word that is used here is a word that means to hold in contempt, to make less of, to scorn. And so he rues the day that he is born. And he says that in chapter 3, verse 3, he says, "Let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said, a man is conceived." Now think about this. I think back to June 16th, 2008, when we went to the hospital, Krista and I, to have Madison, our firstborn. And I remember a lot of things about that night. There's some things that I don't remember, but there are several things that I do remember. I remember there being great anticipation. I remember there being great uncertainty as to how I was going to do this, to be a father. I can remember many, many things about that night, and several things that still to this day I'm reminded of, because it was such an incredible day. It was an incredible day to declare that I am a father, that we have this beautiful baby girl who was someone that we had prayed for, and I can't imagine having this attitude of Job at this moment to say, "Cursed be the day that I was born." But he was in such a place of despair, this lament, where in his mind, he wished that he had never even been born. Why? Because he had lost everything. There'd been such hurt and such pain and such agony that he falls into this deep, deep despair. He even goes on in verse 8, he says, "Let those curse it who curse the day, who are ready to rouse up Leviathan." This is some Canaanite mythology of where there's this sea creature that they believe that he would rise up out of the sea and would create an eclipse on the sun, that it would be complete darkness. And he uses all of these different ways to describe darkness. And there maybe, even now in your life, you may be experiencing this heavy burden, this almost darkness that you have in your life because of things that are going on, the loss of a loved one, maybe the loss of a job, financial issues, relationship issues, whatever that looks like. And you feel this deep, deep weight. And you may even share this sentiment with Job of "I curse the day that I was born." Such a heavy, heavy, heavy thought. But we know that ultimately we're going to see, not just through this chapter, but through all of these discussions, and God ultimately answering Job, that Job and his faith would be restored. So he laments the day that he was born. He rues the day that he was born. He wishes that he had not been born. We see also in Jeremiah chapter 20, he echoes this as well. Jeremiah, the prophet, I'll flip there very quickly. Jeremiah chapter 20, So it's not just unique to Job, but here is a man called by God to deliver a very hard message to a people who would reject him. He says in verse 14, "Cursed be the day on which I was born, the day when my mother bore me. Let it not be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought the news to my father. A son is born to you, making him very glad." And so we see this. And again, we've talked about guys like Edwards and Spurgeon, guys like Martin Luther, who wrestled with this very, very difficult despair. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I'll tell you this. Many of you know this story, so I'm not going to give a ton of detail. But those of you who are watching, maybe you're not really familiar with some things that have happened in my life over the last couple of years. But I've been in ministry for 15 years, have given my life to serve students and their families, and have always felt as though I was, it's largely probably pride, that I was mentally strong and that I could handle the things that came my way. And about 2 years ago, had a really difficult period of time that was kind of related to some health issues, and it sent me into about a 6-month period that was really hard. And I can remember this darkness and this heaviness, kind of what Job is describing, that just kind of settled. And for several months, no matter what it was, my wife Krista was super encouraging. People around me loved me, encouraged me. But there was this heaviness that I had never really experienced before in my entire life. I don't know that it would be depression or anything like that. It was more fear than anything, and it just weighed on me so unbelievably heavy. And for the first time in my life, I really began to understand anxiety that people feel, the stress and the worry that people feel. And for about 6 months, it was a very, very dark time. I mean, being a grown man and feeling like, he didn't want to get out of bed, he didn't want to do anything because, fearful of what might happen. It was terrible. It was terrible. And so I kind of understand to a degree. Now Job's suffering was far greater than mine. And you've experienced significant trouble and pain in your life, there's no doubt. But Job was carrying this unbelievable weight. I mean, again, every bit of his family, short of his wife, 10 kids killed all in one day. His wife, just curse God and die. His means to provide a living and provide for his family, all of that stuff was gone. And he had this unbelievable weight. And there's this just heavy darkness. And we can relate to that to some degree. There's hope for us, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But there's something else in verse number 11. Not only does he curse the day that he was born, but he says, I wish that I had died at birth. I wish that I had died at birth. Verse 11, why did I not die at birth? Come out from the womb and expire. Why did the knees receive me? Why the breast that I should nurse? For then I would have lain down and been quiet. I would have slept, and I would have been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth who rebuilt ruins for themselves, or with princes who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. Or why was I not as a hidden stillborn child, as infants who never see the light? There the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary are at rest. Where the prisoners are at ease together, they hear not the voice of the taskmaster. The small and the great are there, and the slave is free from his master. Why did I not die at birth is something that Job is asking. And again, I'm sure that there are times in our lives where we maybe, because of the hard things that we're experiencing, maybe we have shared that sentiment at some point. He goes from, why was I ever born, to why, God, having been born, why did I not die at birth? But then he points to something that gives us great hope, and that is that there is something far greater that awaits. That after this life, when we breathe our last breath on this earth, we are immediately ushered into the presence of our King. There the wicked cease from troubling. There the weary are at rest. There the prisoners are at ease together. They hear not the voice of the taskmaster. And the small and the great are there, and the slave is free from his master. Now, there's some discussion as to maybe what concept of heaven Job would have had. I think that more than anything, this points to the fact that his hope is in God, and that for us, as we wrestle and as we struggle with things, that ultimately is where our hope is. The beautiful thing about our struggle, the beautiful thing about our suffering is God always brings good from it, but also this life is not all that we have. That there is something far greater that we await, where all of the pain, all of the things that we experience, all of those things will be gone, and we'll never have to struggle with it again. There's a place where there's no more tears, there's no more grieving, there's no more hurt, there's no more sin. And so that is a great comfort for us. But he continues his lament. Not only does he go on and he talk about the fact that he wishes that he had never been born, he wishes that he had died at birth, but now he even just says, I wish that I would die now. Verse 20, why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter in soul, who long for death, but it comes not, and dig for it more than hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave? Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? For my sighing comes instead of my bread, and my groanings are poured out like water. For the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. And so we see that he says, I just wish that I would die. Why is light given to him who is in misery? Why does life go on though I am miserable? And so let me pause and let me just say this. All right. We have this unbelievable hurt that we experience in our lives, and Job is expressing his hurt, his pain, his despair, and we share in that. And there are times where we question the day of our birth, that maybe we wish that this life would be over and that this suffering would end. And so where's the hope in that? And that's what's hard about this passage, is you read that and you're just like, man, I don't know. I don't know where that hope is. How do I walk away encouraged from this? Well, the beautiful thing is that the story of Job is not over. All right, it will continue, and what we find is that God overwhelmingly blesses Job because of his faithfulness. But even in this passage, there are a couple things that I just want to share with you that I hope will give you some hope. One, we talked a little bit about the fact that there's this picture of there's something that awaits us after this life is over, where I believe with all of my heart that the suffering that we endure on this earth, that there is an eternal reward in heaven for that. And so our suffering is not in vain. Even in this life, God is doing something. All right, so even in this life, God is doing something. But there's a reward for those who suffer and who persevere. Another thing that I want you to see, a couple of just things to think about. Number one, it is possible for Christians who are solid and deep in their faith to fall into despair. I think sometimes we have this tendency to question maturity of people who begin to struggle, who begin to wrestle with depression, or they wrestle with despair, and they lament. We say, "What's wrong with you?" But I think that this reminds us that we see lament all throughout, especially the Old Testament. But even Jesus on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? I think that the despair that we feel is real, and I think that it is possible for us to fall into this place of despair. It doesn't disqualify us. It doesn't mean that we're not a Christian. It just means that we are wrestling with some really heavy burden. And so then the question becomes, well, where do we find our hope? And that is in this idea that God carries us through the storm. He is with us. He does not leave us. He does not forsake us. So it's possible for us as believers to be thrown into this deep despair. Another thing that we see is that Job never curses God in this. He doesn't demean God. He doesn't accuse God. He even understands, in verse 23, it says, whom God has hedged in. He understands that God is at work. He is God, and we are not. And so I think we take hope in the fact that though we lament, it's not demeaning the character of God. It's saying, God, and this is what we see in the Psalms of Lament. All right, and you can read through several of the Psalms of Lament, and you'll see this, is that over and over and over again, the psalmist will say, I don't like this, I don't like this. God, why is this happening? God, why are you doing this? And then inevitably at the end of every psalm of lament, he says, but God, I trust you. God, I trust you, and I will worship you, and I will praise you because I know that you are doing something far beyond what I can imagine. And then number 3, there are times that no one on this earth can understand the pain that you are experiencing, that there are times where you will feel lonely because this darkness has settled in. No one can really fully understand what you're experiencing. And it's in those times that you call out to the one who brings you hope and restoration, God himself. And so I would encourage you, we don't know what the next couple of weeks hold. We don't know what the next couple of months hold, or even days. You may be in a very difficult period of your life right now, and I know that this is incredibly heavy. And as you consider the brokenness of your own life, that there may be wounds that need to be healed, and you may be crying out even today, saying, "God, why? And it's okay. It's okay to say, God, I don't like this. God, why is this happening? In doing so, turn your lamenting into praise. God, I understand that this is happening and there's a purpose and there's a reason, but God, I'm going to praise you in the midst of that. And that's one of the things, even in my own life, when I talk about this mess that I dealt with 2 years ago, one of the things that was consistent in my life that I believe really helped me to move past this darkness that I kind of existed in for 6 months was, one, just being in the Word. Just being in the Word. I was meditating on Scripture. I was memorizing verses. I was clinging to those promises that God had made. And then 2, just worship. And I think that what that does is it reminds us that there is a God who's worthy. There is a God who deserves our praise, even in the midst of heartache and troubles and trials. We're going to see that this is going to get worse for Job. Not only is he experiencing all of this real tangible loss, but here, as we get into next week, his friends who are there to really comfort him begin to turn on him and to accuse him, leaving him feeling even more alone and desperate. And he's going to continue to kind of spiral into a point where God himself kind of calls Job to task. He says, "Where were you when I did all of this?" And I think that at the end of the day, when we find that Job, though he questions and though he curses the day that he was born and wish that he had died and all of these other things, we're going to find that that God is our great hope, and he restores, and he is faithful and true. And so again, we're walking through the book of Job, and again, this is God's providence. We started this before some of this coronavirus stuff started, and so I hope that as you read chapter 3 and as you think about this, no matter where you're at in your life, whether you're in that season of darkness or maybe you've just come out of it or maybe you're heading into it, is that you will remember this and that you will be encouraged. And so I hope that you'll reach out if you need anything, if you have any comments or anything like that. Would love some feedback and some encouragement. It's encouraging to me to hear how God is at work in you. And so hopefully, you guys will shoot me some messages and we'll be able to talk. If you're struggling with anything going on in life, reach out to Krista or myself. We'll be reaching out and just kind of praying for you and hopefully being able to be an encouragement to you. So you guys... shoot message if you need anything, and we'll talk soon. God bless.